Hey, what's up, guys? Today I'm wanting to do one of those distro reviews that I was talking about, where I would go through and check out with y'all on video one of the more gaming-oriented Linux distros. I'm not really gonna probably make this a regular thing, one, because there's not a whole lot of gaming-oriented distros out there, and two, I don't really want to become like a distro review channel. I'm really more doing this so I can help people who are wanting to make the switch to Linux, primarily for gaming, a more streamlined and simple process. So one distro that I like the look of, that I've checked out in the past, I've never done it on channel because, I've checked this out like way before, a couple times actually, way before I ever started uploading YouTubes regularly, channels, before I started uploading videos regularly to YouTube. And that distro is Garuda Linux. So Garuda is an Arch-based Linux distribution. I believe they do maintain some of their own packages, like in their own they have their own Arch mirrors, so to speak. So it's not exactly par to par with Arch Linux, but it's still an Arch-based distro. It still uses Pacman and all of that. But it's like one of the JustWorks distros that they pretty much do most of the work for you out of the box. So you have a few different choices of desktop environment. We've got KDE, XFCE, GNOME, LXQt with KWin, Cinnamon, Mate, Wayfire, Qtile, i3 Window Manager, and Sway. They do releases for the ISOs, but it's still a rolling release distribution. So if you install it, you don't have to do like a major upgrade, obviously. So what makes this distribution different than the others? We're gonna skip that because every distribution pretty much uses Calamares. It's one of those distributions that follows the philosophy of unused RAM is wasted RAM. So the RAM that you have left over, it pretty much will allocate as much of that to make your graphical and audio experience as high quality as possible, but it doesn't necessarily get in the way of doing whatever tasks, because the Linux is actually pretty good about allocating resources when it needs. The file system that it uses by default is BetterFS with ZSTD compression, which if you use BetterFS, there's zero reason you shouldn't have this on by default. I actually use BetterFS myself because I like the idea of subvolumes and not having to maintain a bunch of actual different partitions for my different file systems and, my different mount points, because, they wind up taking up their own space on the disk, and, it's more like having to maintain several different storage devices rather than just having one straightforward block device. It also has automatic snapshots out of the box using Snapper, which it even says down here, and it even comes with, this is kind of standard on most Linux distributions, GUI tool for various common tasks like restoring your system, system upgrades, things like that. And it also uses the chaotic AUR, which is basically, it's like the AUR, but it comes with pre-compiled binaries, so if you don't want to have to compile AUR packages from source, or have to wait forever installing a bajillion different dependencies that you're just going to wind up deleting afterwards anyways. But it does also have packages that you can't find on the AUR, but I think with the chaotic AUR, they have to be binaries though. It comes with a fork of LibreWolf, which is Fire Dragon. Basically, it's essentially just LibreWolf. They may have like a couple changes to their privacy defaults, but LibreWolf is pretty hardened out of the box. But one big difference between LibreWolf and Fire Dragon is Fire Dragon has a better KDE integration, and it also comes with some add-ons outside the box besides, the uBlock origin that LibreWolf comes with by default. It also comes with Surex, which is a search aggregator that is privacy oriented. You should actually check out Surex if you don't already use that and you're not planning on using Garuda Linux because Surex is just a better way to browse the internet, because you can combine your instance, you can configure your instance to really search from any browser or not browser, but any search engine that you want. You know, you can get search results from Google, Bing, Ecosia, DuckDuckGo, and it makes all of these queries on your behalf without sending these I keep saying browsers, these search engines your data, which if you're a big privacy advocate, I know I am, I'm sure you are too, it's definitely worth a look, though it's not the only one. There's also Hoogle, but I don't really like Hoogle that much, though. Surex is a little bit better. It's got more functionality. It's also got, and I'm pretty sure this is just well, I guess not. I mean, we'll look at this when we get in there, but this is a GUI for maintaining, really it's more for the gaming side of stuff, but you can use kernels, and that hardware configuration, I believe, is more referring to your GPU. And it comes with a GUI for installing gaming software, which I will go over with all this stuff with you when we get in the actual virtual machine. It uses the Linux Zen kernel, which is faster and more responsive. I mean, it's saying it right here. I actually use Linux Zen myself because there's no reason to really not use it if you're, one, especially if you're gaming on the desktop, but two, if you are looking for the most performance, because it's a little bit more real-time than the default Linux kernel, but not necessarily real-time, if that makes sense. It doesn't have some features that the regular Linux kernel has, but unless you really need those features, you might as well just use Linux Zen, especially if you are playing games. Let's see, I think I've covered pretty much everything truly important here. It does have ZRAM by default too. I also use ZRAM, but I think you can still hibernate just fine with this because it does hibernate to a swap file. We'll go to the download page here, and we'll look at the minimum requirements. It's saying that you need 30 gigs of storage space, 4 gigs of RAM, video card with OpenGL 3.3 or better, and a 64-bit system. And I'll just go ahead and say this now, you don't need 30 gigs of storage space to actually install this distro. I think out of the box you really need about 8 or 9 gigs. But you're not going to have any free space. I think they really just tell you that because they have versions of this that come with all the gaming software installed out of the box. It's got the installation procedure here if you are looking to install this on a bare metal machine. But it does have some recommendations here that we're not going to really follow because, you know, I do want to showcase this to y'all. It says here that dual booting may lead to unexpected issues, but this is really talking about Windows, and this applies to really any Linux distribution out there because the Windows bootloader likes to overwrite grub for some reason, and we don't really know why, but it's just because, you know, Microsoft's operating system is really greedy. It's optimized for performance on real hardware, and as such, it's not recommended to install it in a virtual machine. Because it might result in a bad experience, supposedly, like set up a system not working, which I can tell you, I think they just really just say that to cover their ass, as can always be a bit finicky installing to a virtual machine. But we're gonna be using Virt Manager, which is gonna be the closest thing to installing to a bare metal installation as possible. It's saying to not use Snapd and Flatpak whenever possible. They're considered unsupported. If you do decide to use those, I would recommend you go to the Arch forums. Typically, even though this is not really Arch Linux necessarily, they are usually more willing to help as long as you're not like a Manjaro user or something. But with all that out the way, let's go ahead and check out the downloads. So they have a couple different versions, like I was saying, basically just different editions that come with the different desktop environments and window managers, but they do have some other ones down here. Like they've got KDE Lite, which just comes with essentially just, this used to be called bare bones, by the way, but I don't know why they called it that, because this was still just KDE Lite. basically, it doesn't have all of the eye candy that their other editions come with. You just get straight up KDE. And they've also used to have a community edition, but now they have KDE Git, which is still this one here, but it comes up with pretty much all the Git versions of the different packages that support Git, obviously, rather than using stable releases of software. So today we're going to be checking out Garuda KDE Dragon Eyes, which is their flagship edition. We're not going to be checking out the gaming edition. If you're wondering what the difference between these two is, gaming edition pretty much just has all of the software, not all of it, but most of the software that you would probably go ahead and install right out the box. I don't use some of these, so I'm going to avoid installing that. But I've already got it downloaded. I've already got the live disk downloaded, so I'm going to load up Vert Manager here. I'm going to delete that because I was just taking a look at it before I installed it. I'm going to load up the ISO here, and obviously this is not a huge distribution, so we're going to have to install it as Arch Linux. I'm going to give this virtual machine 4 gigs of RAM and 4 threads. I'm going to give it 30 gigs of disk space. Called it Garuda Linux, and I'm going to customize this configuration before I install because I want to use UEFI. And I also would like to use 3D acceleration, and as such I need to go up here and turn on OpenGL and put my listen type to none, and we can go ahead and start installing here. You want to boot without the proprietary drivers. I'm not using NVIDIA, I'm using a Spice right now. Alright, so we're in the live environment here. Before we get started, I'm going to go to the system settings and I'm going to turn on 1080, but keep in mind that it's not going to change to that when I go back in here. So we'll do 1080, just so that way we got the whole screen. We're just going to use the whole screen. As you can see here, the setup is very Mac-like with how it's set up here. Now there's a couple key changes from the last time I took a look at Garuda Linux, and I believe this is a recent change because this was still here, I think, a couple months ago. They have removed Latte Dock, and the reason why is because Latte Dock, for unfortunately about half a year, has been the dead project. The maintainers stopped working on it, and it relatively recently stopped working with KDE Plasma. I think, I want to say about 5.26 is when it stopped working. I'm sure there's some patches you could do to keep it working, but I really don't recommend running it anyways because it does take up a lot of resources. I think it takes about 1 gig of RAM to even run Latte. But KDE Plasma does have a way of building a dock now, as you can see, because I can show you here. This is indeed a KDE panel. This is not separate, which honestly I think is better because, you know, that's just another moving part. It doesn't really stay integrated with the KDE desktop. It's kind of its own thing that you'd have to maintain, and it's a bit of a pain, especially if you did like multi-monitor setups and you didn't want to like copy the same panel to each display, and especially if you have a laptop. But anyways, I guess we'll go ahead and go over the live CD here. We have a partition manager, which I think is still the KDE partition manager. It is. We have the ability to restore a snapshot. Obviously, there's no snapshot to see. We can shroot. We have boot repair, system cleaner. But today, though, right now we're going to just go ahead and install Garuda Linux. Alright, so I'm going to keep my locale as American English. I've already guessed my time zone. Probably got it from the QXL. That's already correct. We'll erase disk. We're not going to use swap. I'm going to go ahead and put this information here. I don't care about doing that. We'll go ahead and do a password. And we'll go ahead and start installing it. I'll speed this up so you don't have to sit here and watch this. All right, we're now loaded up into Garuda. That installation didn't take too long. All right, and before I start anything, once again, I am going to use the whole monitor. And now it's going to first interact with sudo so that we can properly get sudo privileges rolling. Another thing is Garuda by default uses the fish shell. You can change the shell. I will say it's maybe a little bit more complicated than you'd think, but there are tutorials, and there's been issues with it in the past where people have resolved that you should be able to check out if you don't want to use fish. I personally don't use it because there's some features that I can't use with fish that do work with bash, so I just keep using bash. But otherwise though, like I said, if you're just using this as a regular desktop, you should be completely fine. So it's gonna run through these updates here. Another thing too is actually saying the init ramfs thing. If you are someone who uses mkinit cpio like I do, just a heads up, Garuda Linux uses Dracut. I personally don't use Dracut because I'm just ingrained in my old ways. I prefer mkinit, but if you like Dracut though, then there's no setup for it out of the box. It's all ready to go. All right, so we're gonna go through the setup assistant here. This isn't the gaming section. This is more for your work apps. If you need printer, Samba, and scanner support, then you can do that. You can install more wallpapers or pen testing software. I was actually wondering where their Black Arch distribution went, but it seems like you can install it with any of their packages now. They used to have a separate KDE setup for installing Black Arch's repos, but it does not seem like that is a separate thing anymore. You can do it with just about all of them. You have input support for, your different style fonts in case you need something like Japanese or Korean or anything like that. We're not gonna be worried about that. They got different software centers, like Discover, which is the software center for KDE, GNOME firmware. They have an app image launcher, which is kind of weird that they support app image, but not Flatpak or Snaps. There's a thing here for Octopi. This you don't have to install this. If you install Garuda, it already comes here. You have a choice of different kernels. Not going to install any of those. You have Office software like LibreOffice, Joplin, Free Office, Only Office, Abbey Word. You have different browsers here. I believe it's already got FireDragon. We'll just go ahead and click those anyways, my favorite ones. We have email clients. I like Kmail, but I see they no longer have Tutanota on here, but you should still be able to install that perfectly fine. You've got your different communication apps like Telegram. There's Discord, Fractal, NeoChat, you got Signal, and then we have different internet utilities like the FDM, the free download manager. There's also DLudge, BitTorrent, JDownloader 2, NitroShare. There's also PuTTY, which I really don't think you actually truly need because the terminal has SSH built in. We've got audio applications, which include music players and actual sound software. So like Strawberry, you know, LMMS, Mix. There's Bitwig, Audacity, which I don't recommend using Audacity anymore. I would say either use Audacious or Tenacity, which are freedom-respecting forks of Audacity. We've got video editing software like Kden, there's Shotcut, VLC, OBS. We've got multimedia software, which more for editing tags and things like that, but you even have like stuff like Hypnotics and stuff like that, or Shortwave, which is actually a pretty cool app for if you want to listen to radio in your local area. We've got development software like Vim, GNU Emacs, Visual Code if, you know, you want to use that for some reason. I don't know why you'd want to if you're on Linux. GitHub Desktop, Docker. So, you know, it's not just gaming oriented. You know, they support, you know, actually doing work with your system. We got virtualization software, you know, Virt Manager, no reason to install that. I'm in a virtual machine. And, you know, some software that that doesn't necessarily fit in any of those other categories. I guess I'll install Conky. I don't know what you need variety for. That's probably there for the other ones, like Sway, stuff that doesn't have image, you know, backgrounds installed within. We'll have to enter our password. I guess while we're waiting, we can go ahead and play around with this setup a little bit. So like I was saying, it's very Mac-alike. You see how you have like a panel on top and you've got a dock here on the bottom, but it's not like I was saying, like a true dock. The original dock was more like Mac because you had separators. You'd have like your active apps like over here and like the trash can. But you know, it's still a good compromise. And honestly, I think it's a little bit better. I think the default Mac setup is a little bit cluttered. But, you know, it's a standard KDE, though. And this is all within KDE, too, which is very impressive because you used to have to install a lot of stuff. Like, for instance, like Latte, out of the box if you wanted to get something different than standard KDE. Which even then is kind of hard to say standard KDE because KDE is just so modular. Alright, and now that we've run through Garuda Assistant, we're going to go through the next one, which is Garuda Gamer. Now, this is like the installer for installing, you know, your various gaming software. I'm going to install Steam. I'm going to install Lutris, GameScope, VK Basalt, Mango HUD, G Overlay, Core Control, OpenRGB. We've already got OBS. And if you're using NVIDIA, then I would recommend installing GWE. And if you don't have anything AMD, then I wouldn't install Core Control because this is for AMD components. But that's gonna be, this is for like your main gaming hardware. We should also install Winetricks, and it even has a thing to let you install the custom fork of Proton from, well, it's like a custom fork of Glorious Egg Roll's fork. So it's got some of the best patches that are known to work with the most games and give them the best performance, but some games don't really like GE. I'm not going to bother installing that because I'm not going to be playing a game in the virtual machine. I'm just showing y'all the distribution because you can watch my channel and see how Linux gaming already is. It has a choice of free and open source games that you can download from here. And there's also a section for emulators. I'm not going to be installing any emulators. I don't think their PCSX2 is working because it uses a different package name now. So we're going to go ahead and install that. We'll click apply. I'll put in my password here. Alright, and we'll exit out of that. We'll check out the Garuda Settings Manager and see what this is all about. So we'll check out hardware configuration. Like I was saying, This seems to be something pertaining to pretty much just mostly graphics. We'll check out the kernel, and I think it will... I think you can actually change your kernel on the fly here. I mean, you can do it in Linux as well, like, you know, just regular old Linux. But I still don't really recommend changing your kernel unless you are looking to restart it afterwards. You can change your user accounts here, you know, your time and day, you know, just normal stuff pretty much. We can do the network assistant, which I've never seen this before, so we'll take a look at it together. We can create a Wi-Fi hotspot, you know, airplane mode and all that stuff. And we can even do our drivers here, which is pretty neat. We can see the boot options, which is probably just Grub Customizer. No, I have seen this before. So it's just kind of like a simpler form of Grub Customizer from what I can see. And they've got different services here as well. So another thing I was wanting to look at on camera was Fire Dragon, which I can show you has Surex in it. So I guess we can type in something random here. Last time I checked out Garuda Linux, Surex did not work. As you can see though, this is following our theme here. And if we go to appearances, God forgive me, I'm about to destroy this desktop. Huh, well, I didn't do that. I'm sure you can do it just fine in the browser, though. Well, we didn't get our wallpaper back. What is the... Okay, the setup system we already went through. But you see, it's got a lot of eye candy, though. It's pretty nice looking. And like I was saying, it uses fish by default, which is a pretty nice looking shell. They've got a pretty good rice setup for it. But anyways, that there was Garuda Linux. If you liked what you saw, check out Garuda Linux. I'll put the link down in the description. It's not using that much memory off the bat neither, which is pretty nice to see. If you are looking to make the switch to Linux, would I recommend Garuda Linux? I mean, yeah, I would. You may have some issues potentially because it doesn't have as much backing behind it as a more, I guess, well-established distro like Arch Linux or Debian or Ubuntu or anything along those lines. But I've put people on Garuda Linux before and they haven't had any complaints really, other than the typical complaints that people would have about Linux in general, which there's not that many, except, you know, maybe for like some of the normies out there. You know, it's got good eye candy and stuff like that. So, you know, if you don't care about using up system resources, then, you know, I'd say this is a pretty comfy distro to set up. Just don't change the thing you had there before because, you know, it's going to wind up kind of breaking a little bit. But I'm sure that'd be pretty easy to set back up, though. This is KDE after all. But anyways, if you liked the video, subscribe. If you want to see more content like this, share this video to anybody that you know that's wanting to make the switch to Linux. If you're wanting to make the switch to Linux yourself, check out some of my guides, my video essays for philosophy on free and open source software. And as such, I hope y'all guys have an awesome and wonderful rest of y'all's day.